Welcome to the Sisterhood Collective podcast, where we empower women to break barriers, overcome limiting beliefs, and achieve true success. I'm your host, Laurie Drummond, entrepreneur and founder of 5 successful businesses. Join me as I share proven strategies, interview inspirational leaders, and provide behind-the-scenes insights to help you level up in your business, career, and in life. Because together, we can get further faster. Okay, let's dive in. Today's podcast is with a decluttering and organising coach. Her name is Lauren. We met a few weeks ago while I was down doing a branding shoot in Canberra, and I went to a women's networking event, and poor Lauren got sat next to me. But as you can imagine, we're both talkers actually, so we were gas bagging for quite a while, and it was very interesting when you ask someone what they do. When she said that, I was like, wow, that's really quite interesting. And I imagine many of us have way too much stuff in our house or in our life. And I imagine by clearing and decluttering some of this stuff that we have can lead to improved mental health, have those positive mental aspects to it. So what I'm doing today in the conversation was I really wanted to ask Lauren a little bit about what she does and how it impacts on her clients, some of their success stories, what the benefits of decluttering and organising is, along with some strategies and approaches to actually decluttering, not just the physical space, but the mental space as well. And then what some methods and habits are to stop you from going back and building up this clutter again. You could say it's a little bit more about being mindful with our organisation. So I thought it best to get the specialist in herself to just talk to us a little bit about decluttering and organising. So I'm really excited talking to you today, Lauren. When we met in Canberra about 4 weeks ago, and poor you had to sit next to me, but after a cocktail, the conversation didn't stop. But what really intrigued me was when you told me, like, well, hey, what do you do? And you say, I'm a decluttering and organising coach. And I was like, that is incredible. And I've never heard of it before, but I can see how valuable that could be. So I was hoping just to start with that perhaps you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you became passionate about decluttering and organising. Yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've always been interested in organising. I was that kid that had like colour coordinated school supplies and stuff. I liked things to be pretty. I liked things to look right. You might say a little bit anal, but I think that's an actual diagnosis now. So, but I suppose the decluttering really, really came into play when my mum got sick 7 or 8 years ago now. She got really, really sick and had to be hospitalised, and I was left to clear out her house when she couldn't live in it anymore. Her house was 3 bedrooms. She lived alone, 3 bedrooms plus a garage, and it was packed like floor to ceiling. Now, it wasn't like you imagine, those hoarder shows or anything. You could still get from one room to another. It was actually still quite beautiful. She was an artist, and you could tell an artist lived there, right? But when you opened cupboards, there's empty boxes, inside empty boxes, inside empty boxes. And then there were empty DVD cases, not even the cover. It was just a clear empty DVD case. And I found one of those in every cupboard. And she didn't have an explanation for me. But this went on, and I'm there to clear it out, to pack up the must-haves and get rid of the rest. And it was a huge undertaking. Just packing things up took two weeks of like 12-hour days, just me, and it was exhausting. And as I was going, I realised how much emotion she'd kept in all of these things. When I'd talk to her on the phone and I'd send her photos and ask her about different things and why do we have to keep this? There was so much emotion. There's so much guilt. There's so much history. There's just so much in this stuff. And even in the tiny things that just didn't mean anything to me and I couldn't understand where the value was coming from, it held so much to her. And when I reflected about how much she was holding in her physical belongings and how difficult it was for me to process it, how hard must it be to live with that, right? For everything to have so much in it. And when that house was finally out of the way and I came back to my own home, with 2 young kids, we had a lot of stuff. We're not minimalists, not then, not now. We have stuff, but I felt this kind of like unsettling. I felt almost itchy, that every time I looked around, I was like, oh, there's a bit much there. I'd sort of caught this bug. By decluttering her house, I'd realised how cathartic it was to clear space. It was a weird way for a business to come about, but that passion for clearing space and that catharsism that comes with it, and then seeing the profound difference that it had in the rest of my life, I just wanted to share that with other people. I wanted to see the change it could make for someone else.
A lot of people associate decluttering and organizing, I guess, just with cleaning up a physical space. But having had this chat with you previously, when I asked you probably a million questions, it extends beyond that kind of physical environment, and it can positively impact our mental well-being.
Absolutely. So when I said the profound impact it has on all aspects of life, so for me, clearing the physical space actually started to help me deal with some of the mental clutter. I've had depression and anxiety most of my life. There's signs of it from as early as about 6 years old. I'm a messed up person just like many others, right? But there were some parts that I just couldn't deal with. Physical stuff is a lot easier to deal with because I can pick it up. I can, look at it at different angles. I can analyze it and I can ask questions and make a conscious decision about it. But when we're dealing with the things in our mind or less tangible items, it's really hard to get those different angles and it's hard to ask questions of it. But when you start to do it with the physical stuff, you can see the patterns. And the patterns we have with the physical stuff, we're often doing the same thing in our brains, right? So I noticed that as I saw patterns in my physical environment, why I was choosing to keep something versus why it was easier to let go, I could ask those same questions of habits that I might have, or thought patterns, or even people, like relationships that I might hold on to with friends or work colleagues or anything like that, that was just unnecessary, but I was holding on to them in the same way you might hold on to a pair of shoes that you never wear. So by dealing with the physical stuff, I found it sort of gave me permission and it gave me some strategies to help me deal with the intangible clutter that we all have as well. And so that's where that profound change happens. You can see the physical change, but you start to feel it when your behavior changes as well, using those same strategies.
So can you give me an example of a client? I mean, obviously you've got quite a few clients that you've worked with over the past. So yeah, an example of a client that you've worked with, how did it improve, I guess, their quality of life or even their mental state?
I've got an online client that came to me mostly bothered by, she's bothered by a lot of things in her home. She'd gone through a separation, which is, a big trauma in itself, and dealing with the physical clutter fallout of a relationship breakdown. But she was really agitated on our first session about her daughter's clutter. She was really bothered by a collection that her child had, and she wanted me to give her strategies that she could pass on to her daughter to clear them. What we actually ended up doing was having a conversation, just, me and the mother, about what her daughter's collection actually looked like from the daughter's point of view. And we discussed the difference between a collection and clutter and how it was being looked after and maintained and what that collection actually represented to her child. And by the end of it, we hadn't actually gotten rid of anything physical at all, but what had been cleared was her expectations and her opinion of her daughter's mess. And she actually started to see this collection as a labour of love. It was one of the ways her daughter expressed herself. And you could literally see the relief in her body, in her face, when she changed her thinking around the physical things. It's been several years since that, I think maybe 3 or 4 years even since our first session together. And she still messages me sometimes and says, I can't believe what a difference this has made in my life. Like from that one session of just going, oh, it's not about we need to have a box for this and here's the rules and let's make sure that everything has a place. And, fitting into those traditional structures of decluttering or organising, it was about understanding the reasons behind the clutter and managing the expectations and giving that child space. And over the years, her daughter actually has decluttered on her own. But the biggest shift was their relationship and how they supported each other through that process.
And so you've helped them develop that, but I guess communicate.
Yeah.
And see each other, see different perspectives of things or stuff.
So, and like we know what's happening in our minds, but you can't see it from different angles. You only see it from your own. Whereas a physical thing, you can pick it up and look at it at different angles. When it's somebody else's clutter, we can pick up their physical things. We can go, oh, look at all of these books. You've got too many books and you never read them, or whatever it might be. But you can't see it from their perspective. You don't know why they're holding on to it. You don't know why it is so vitally important for them to keep those things. So you used your example of your shoes and clothes.
Mm.
A lot of women go through a period of having, the really sexy heels, gorgeous shoes, a bit of the Carrie Bradshaw.
I'm still there. I'm still living in the Sex and the City.
So I've always had problems with my feet, so I've never actually had that part. But I understand that a lot of women have this period of their lives, and some women never leave it. Some women are rocking those stilettos well into their 60s or 70s, and good for them. But a lot of women reach a point where they physically can't wear those shoes anymore. They love the look of them, but it's just agony, and it's just not in their day anymore. It's not who they are. But if they still really love those shoes, I'm not here to tell you to throw them out. If you love your shoes, by all means keep them, but think about why you're keeping them, and are they serving that purpose where they are? So a really clever strategy in that case is, if you've got these gorgeous shoes, you're never going to wear them, so why are they sitting in your wardrobe? But maybe they could be art. Maybe you can put some shelves in your office or in your wardrobe or wherever you see them and feel good. And now they're a part of your life. They still bring you joy, but they're not taking up valuable real estate where your functional shoes are. That makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. Mine definitely aren't art. I think I've just got to make some tough decisions. I actually have this same, I guess, strategy in a sense with regards to life in general and business, because life gets complicated for everybody. We start to, take on too much, or, commit to too much, or, responsibilities, or we get too much stuff. Or from a business perspective, I build up a bunch of businesses, and then I stop and go, okay, I'm getting a little bit too hectic. I've committed to too much. And now I'm not stopping and enjoying the moment, smelling the roses, doing all that good stuff. And so I seem to go through this cycle personally where I stop and then I reassess and then work out, well, maybe it's time to sell that business and, or hand it over or do whatever. But I start to simplify life again. And so I go through this chaos and I get excited about the chaos and growing, and I'm motivated and I want to grow and do all these things. And then I get tired, and then I start to think, it's time to simplify life again. I want to cut everything away and then kind of rebuild again. And it keeps, I keep growing. I'm setting these foundations and these building blocks to keep growing businesses and personal growth and all those sorts of things. But I need to knock a few levels down every now and then.
Yeah, well, I'm a terrible gardener. I'm an absolutely terrible gardener, but you're describing just life of a tree, right? You have a period of fruit and flowers and growth and, nice big shady bushy leaves. And then you start to go, oh, that's a bit much. The leaves fall, and you go through a period of just quiet nothing for a while, like so maybe germinating under the surface, new ideas and that kind of thing. And then you're going to sprout again. And I don't know a lot about gardening, but I do know that for a lot of plants, you need to prune them so that they can have really abundant growth in the next season. And my apologies to all the green thumbs out there if I've misunderstood that metaphor. but like what you're talking about is just the very cyclical nature of life, isn't it? We all have those times. We have them throughout the day. We have them throughout our menstrual cycles. We have them throughout the different stages of our lives just as humans. You reach a point where you want to do less, but that doesn't mean you're stopping. It just changes where your focus is at that time.
Yeah, and pace.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the life cycle of the tree. It's a really good analogy that you've used. So far we've talked about physical clutter, which I feel like most of us have in some capacity. We just might not be noticing it, right? Until you think about it, you don't even notice it. Obviously, when they start listening to this podcast, they'll go, yes, I need to get into that cupboard or that Tupperware drawer or business, whatever that happens to be. You've also kind of mentioned that by decluttering physical space, it has a positive effect for our mental state. But there was a couple of questions that you use when you're working with your clients. So what are the questions we can probably use ourselves when we are trying to declutter a space?
Okay, so I developed a sort of a framework that I like to use when I coach courses and things. And it's the DCLTR, Declutter framework. So we dream, curate, learn, try, and reset. So that's actually kind of going through that cyclical life cycle thing that we were just talking about. So in our first phase there, dream, that's before you dive in, instead of going, I've got too many clothes, that's it, I'm getting rid of clothes. If you go in at that stage, you're going to have a really hard time making decisions. And that's what decluttering is, it's decision making. So first we dream, we go, okay, for this space, what do I want it to look like? What do I want it to feel like? How am I going to use it? So you can apply this to any aspect. Like I said, it's not just physical clutter. Whichever area you're considering, take some time. You can meditate if you like, do a bit of a visualization. I like to walk clients through imagining the space, like when you come home, where do you put your bag? Where do you put your shoes? Who's greeting you? Like, what does your day look like? That kind of thing. So get a really clear idea of what you want that space to look like. Now, a lot of people just go, I just want it better than now. Okay, that's fine. And that can be your dream, just better than now, but you need to know what better looks like. The clearer you can get on what that goal is, the better.
I love that, because we always talk about visualization. It's one of the first components, is like, you need to know the past, but in stuff that we teach, but like, you certainly need to know what the future looks like. And what I like what you're saying here, visualize the space of what you want it to be before you even can create a plan.
Well, a lot of traditional decluttering wisdom just talks about what to get rid of. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. If we just say, well, I haven't used this in 6 months and I can replace it and all of these other things, they can be very useful questions sometimes. But in order to feel good about the whole process and for it to be a sustainable process, you want it to feel good at every level. You want to feel in control at every level. You want to understand a bit more about yourself at each point, right? So dream. Get a really clear idea of what your goal is. Does it fit in my dream? It doesn't mean you don't love it if you get rid of it. It doesn't mean it's not beautiful. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. It just means it does not belong in this space in my life at this time. Maybe it belongs in another space. Maybe it's time to sell it or donate it or throw it in the bin. But right now the focus is this space. I'm curating this space. Obviously, there are a million questions we can ask about each of those things, and that's what decluttering is just continually asking questions to make a decision. But to simplify it, does it belong here? So learning and trying kind of go hand in hand. The idea of learning, obviously, is seeking out new ideas, and sometimes those ideas might come from other people they might come from listening to a podcast or reading a book or seeing a new idea on TV or wherever you get your inspiration from. And then trying is obviously putting that into action. But the key part of those two is, well, we never stop learning, keep looking for ideas. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this sort of thing. What works for me might not work for you. What works for me today might not work for me tomorrow. We're always learning, and there's always another thing to try. So we learn and try different strategies and then reset. Reset essentially means we go back to dream and check in with ourselves. Is that still our dream? Are we any closer to our dream? Do we need to pivot in some way? You can't judge everything by the same criteria. Your reasons for keeping something are going to be different as life changes. And that's why things like the rule you have for your wardrobe, I love that rule, 1 in, 1 out. I use that rule a lot, but it doesn't always work. And when you start to notice that it's not working, you have to ask why.
For people that get overwhelmed by this, what would you suggest to people that are sitting there going, I know I've got to do it, but I'm not doing it? How do we just get started?
Well, firstly, you are absolutely not alone. Everyone gets overwhelmed, and it mostly comes from, looking at a very large space. And wardrobe is not, well, for most people, it's not the biggest part of your space, but it's very personal. And it's not just a matter of I have too many t-shirts, so I need to get rid of some t-shirts. That's making it oversimplistic, and you're forgetting all of the stories that are involved in each of these items. And there's a lot to work through, and it can be really exhausting. Like I say to every single client that I work with in person, especially after our first session, you're going to be wrecked. It might not be a very physical job, but it is exhausting.
Look, here's another question for you that you've just made me think of. What about for the times you have that smaller dress size in there that you once fit in, or the pants you once fit in, and you're keeping it there for that one day when you finally change your nutritional habits and you lose those couple of kilos or whatever it is that you need to do? What's your thoughts on having those sorts of items around the house?
It's a really common question. Like, I think we all have fluctuations in our body. I know I have struggled with my weight on and off all my life, and my size has changed dramatically in a very short period of time, a few times in my life. And yeah, I have definitely had periods of time where I'm like, I'm keeping these clothes because I will get back to that size. But I've also been at the other end where I'm like, I think I need to hold on to these clothes in case I grow to that size again and I don't want to have to go and buy more. But I've spoken to personal stylists and stuff, and many of them, and my favorite ones, say don't keep them. Don't keep the clothes that don't fit you because they don't make you feel good.
And I heard that the other day, which is why I wanted to get your opinion. I heard someone say, I know everyone does it because we're all guilty of it. I mean, I could go in there and probably pull something out now and go, that's not going to fit anywhere. But I heard someone say the other day, throw that stuff away. Like, why are you doing it to yourself?
I think, again, there's no black and white. There's no one size fits all in every sense of the word. So you have to be comfortable with it yourself. You have to be comfortable with whatever boundaries you're setting. I'm not here to say, well, it hasn't fit you for 6 months, or it's 2 sizes too small, therefore it should go, or anything. Like, don't put yourself in those sort of restricted type boxes. It's too much and it actually hurts, right? But if you're holding on to something just in case you need it, but you can't actually see a point where you're going to need it, and it's probably easy to replace, and you make that uncomfortable feeling when you pick it up, you don't need to keep that, all right? If it's something like, a dress that you absolutely adored, it's so beautiful, you feel so happy when you wear it, but it's just a smidge tight at the moment, and you know that there are reasons and you have a plan for managing yourself back to fit in it soon, then I think it's fair to keep that kind of thing. But if it's something that fit you like 10 years ago before you had children, and like that's 5 sizes smaller than you are now, and even if it did fit, your boobs have kind of changed shape a little bit and your body's changed shape and it's actually not in fashion anymore, all of those kind of things are really, really common for us to hold on to, even if kids were only like 2 years ago. Even if you haven't had kids, your body changes shape. So if you're holding on to those things just because you want to be thin, I say get rid of them.
What I was going to ask you now is, we've talked about this sequence of dream, curate, learn, try, and reset. We've spoken primarily about the physical space, but when you and I were in Canberra, we kind of talked a little bit about decluttering the mind. And I'm curious if you have any tips on what some maybe good little practices are or strategies for us, because many of our listeners are obviously very busy. And so the mindset is busy, and that obviously impacts us from sleep to health to decision making to everything.
As I've already shared, I've struggled with anxiety my whole life. And when I can feel that sort of building up, when my head starts racing and there's 1,000 things to do, my biggest tip is to just get it out of your head. That sounds really simple. Well, of course, Lauren, we want it out of our head. That's what you're asking. I'm saying get it out where you can see it so it becomes a tangible object, right? So write it down. Write it down in dot points, like a to-do list, if you like. Write it down as a big letter to, yourself or whoever's pissed you off or whatever, but get it out of your head onto a piece of paper and into the light where you can see it. Then you can start to treat it like you would a physical object. You can look at each sentence or each word or each dot point and go, okay, in my dream day, in my dream working environment, in my dream relationship, does this have a place? does this thought, this habit, this interaction have a place in that dream? So that takes into account things like, oh shit, my to-do list might have, I need to go to the gym and do a workout, I need to do the groceries, I need to call so-and-so, I need to take the dog to the vet, like your massive to-do list. You might have some things on there that seem like they must be done, but when you work through them one at a time like they are objects in a space, you can think, actually, I don't need to go to the supermarket today. That's not in my day. I'm quite happy letting so-and-so do it. I can outsource that to someone else. I can do it online, or we're